All right, CNT125 Troubleshooting Lab. We are now on Layer 3. So Layer 3, we're thinking anything IP address related on our systems, as well as a lot of routing functions. Some of the tools we can now start using are things like ping and trace. So let's start with PC10, or our VLAN 10 PC, so my PC that we're using right now, I actually have plugged into port 1, so I know it's in VLAN 10. What I'm going to do, let's pull up I'm going to pull up the IP address configuration of this guy, and it should be set up for dynamic. If we look at our map, we have it noted that this should be dynamic addressing. So I'm going to pull this guy up, and I'm going to make sure it is indeed set for dynamic, and make sure my DNS is also dynamic. So I will say OK, I will close, all that kind of good stuff. And I will open my command prompt, and I will do an IP config and see what I get. And I do actually get an IP, a subnet mask, and gateway. So I'm going to look at my map. Let me scroll up here and look at my map. And I should be getting 192.168.64, which I am. Subnet mask 255.255.192.0, and I should be getting gateway 192.168.64.1. I'm getting a .100, so it looks like I might not have the right gateway. And again, this being dynamic, that's coming from the router, so it looks like the router might have an error on this subnet, on this network. So I'm going to have to look at that when I connect into the router, but I at least have the routers, the workstation at least has the correct IP and gateway, or subnet mask, but it does not have the right gateway. So I'll try to ping that gateway, 192.168.64.100, and I have a feeling I'm not going to get anything, because that does not look like a valid gateway. It's not, so it's timing out. And if I were to try to ping to a place like Google, ping www.google.com, it's probably not going to go because I'm not getting outside of my network. I'm not even quite getting to the router. So my PC that's in VLAN 10, if you will, I have an IP, but I don't have the right gateway, so it's causing things to get hung up. Well, let's try plugging into VLAN 30. So I'm going to take this PC and I'm going to move it over to port 21. 21 and 22, I think, are VLAN 30 ports. I think. We move it over there. 21, 22, I think. I'm going to look at our map. Yeah, 21 and 22 are set aside for Wi-Fi VLAN, so I just plugged into port 22. So on this guy, let's see what we get for IP address. I know I'm set for dynamic, so I'll do IP config. And, I need to release what's here, so let's release what's here. And I'm going to do a renew so I can see what it looks like on this network. And this time we're getting a 192.168.192.26. And as I look down through, it looks like we might be okay. So I'm going to look up here my map. 192.168.192 network. 192.0 and then 192.1. That looks promising. So let me try to ping 192.168.192.1, the gateway. Unreachable. Okay. So there might be something holding me up. There might be something wrong with like an access list or something that's holding me up. But I'm at least getting a valid IP. Okay. So we're getting somewhere. We're at least kind of getting an idea of what's not functioning here. So let's look at the switch at layer 3. The only real thing we can look at the switch layer 3 would be the IP addressing. So I'm going to move my console cable into the switch. And actually I do have it there right now. So I will pull up my console cable here. Here's my switch connection class. Let's do a show run on this. And really the only thing layer 3 on this thing would be the IP address we have set for remote access. So I'm going to look at that, 192.168.0.1. Let's look at our map. I have a feeling that's conflicting with the router. The switch should be 192.168.02. It should be 02, because the router should be 01. That's a conflict. That's going to cause some communication issues. So I'm going to come into here, and it's even shut down. Well, let's try to turn that on. Interface VLAN 1. And let's do a no shutdown on this. Let's bring it online. And let's see. Oh, yep, look at that. Duplicate IP address. It's conflicting with the router. Right off the bat, as soon as we turn this on, it's conflicting with the router. Okay. So we're in interface VLAN 1. Let's do IP address on this. 192.168.02. 255.255. 192.0, I think, is our subnet mask. Yep. So let's now do exit, and see what we got here. Let's make sure that changed. There we go. So now that is correct and it's turned on. That's about all we can do layer 3 here. So I'm going to do a copy run start on that. Let's now move on to the router. Let's move on to the router. And let's see, we noted some things already that did not look like they were right. So we're going to start working down through the router. Let's move our console cable over to the router. Enable, class, and show run. All right, what do we want to look for now? Let's just start with the interfaces. Let's just check to see if the interfaces are right. Then we'll worry about the scopes next. So I'm going to scroll up here. Let's make sure our interface addresses are correct. There's our scopes. Let's come down here to the interfaces. Okay. So 192.168.01, and I'm checking the subnet mask. And I need to be diligent. I need to check every digit and make sure. Looks good. 192.168.64.1. Looks good. 192.168.128.1. Looks good. And 192.168.192.1. Looks good. Okay. So my interfaces are okay. The next thing I'd want to check is my scopes, because that's handing out addresses to our nodes. So I'm going to scroll up here. But actually, while I'm at it, I'm going to look here real quickly at, I should have fast Ethernet 0, no IP address, and that turned on. That is now functioning and turned on. And I should also have here on the outside IP address DHCP, and that turned on, which I do. Okay, so I know my interfaces are at least correct. Next thing I would check, here on my list, is let's look at our scopes. Okay, so let's look at our scopes, our DHCP scopes. So scroll up here, and I'm going to look, and I should have, I'm trying to get that where we can see, there we go, there's my DHCP scopes. I'm going to scroll up to my map. All right, all the details are not here, but I can surmise which should be here. If the 00, actually our PC network right here, this PC network, is 192.168.64.1. This should be a 64.0 network. So I should see 192.168.64.0 with the 255.255.192 subnet mask. Looks good. The default router for this should be the router interface, 64.1. And this says 64.100. Yeah, that's an error. So let's fix that right off the bat. Let me do a show run again here. And we're going to pause right there. We want to fix that. So to do that, config T, IP DHCP pool PC. I need to use the exact name that's here. And I'm just going to write over top of that default router. I'm going to write over the one that's there. 192.168.64.1. Enter. While I'm at it, I'm going to check the other stuff. DNS server 8888. That is correct. That's what we're pointing to. We should be going to 8888. There it is. Actually, right here it is right there. 8888. And option 150 would be pointing to the voice network of 128.1. Yep, that's good. So that scope's good. Let's look at the next one. 128.0, 128.1. DNS looks good. Option 150, 128.1. Let's look at the third scope. 192.0, 192.0, 192.1. DNS 8899. That's no good. So let's do IP DHCP pull Wi-Fi. Again, use the exact same name, exact same syntax. And we're going to write over top of the bad one. DNS server 8888. We're going to overwrite that bad one and put the correct one in. Enter. So we're going to exit, and now let's look at our scopes again. My default router here is 64.1. My DNS 8888 looks good. I also want to check my excludeds. I want to make sure these are correct. 192.168.64.1 to 64.25. That's fine. 128.1 to 128.25. That's fine. 192.1 to 192.25. Looking good. So my DHCP scopes are now okay. So there's my router. I'm this far through now. All right. On to NAT. So for NAT, first thing we want to check is our interfaces. We should see under each interface IPNet inside or outside. Well, my sub-interfaces had better be inside, inside, inside. And actually, I'll keep going. It looks like VLAN 30 is missing IPNet inside. Let's take a look down here for 01. This should be IPNet outside, which it is. My outside interface should say IPNet outside. Any of my sub interfaces should say IPNet inside. So let me fix that one right off the bat. Configure terminal interface fast Ethernet 0/0.30. .30. Okay. We want to do IPNet inside. So now as I take a look, show run. Under my interfaces, inside, 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 good. And now my outside interface, IPNet outside. Okay, that's the first part. I now need to look at my access lists in my NAT config lines. Okay. So coming down through, I should have 3 permit statements for my networks. 192.168.64.0, 128.0, 192.0. Good. And I should also have the inverse mask here. 0063. I borrowed 2 bits, so I borrowed to the 64 place. 63, 255 would be right for the inverse mask. So those 3 lines are correct. But if I look here, I don't have the third network listed. I don't have that third one, so I need to add that. So I will add that right now. Config T, IPNet inside source list 3 interface fast Ethernet 0/1 overload. This needs to be the outside interface. The outside interface, the outside interface. So I will add that, and when I take a look at my show run now, I should hopefully see that entry down here. There's my 3 networks, and then my 3 overload statements. So I now have picked up that. Okay, when I come back in the next podcast, we're going to go back through and start checking how did this affect our workstations. So let me do a copy run start here. I'll save that, and when we come back on the next podcast, I'll start plugging the workstations in and see what's working now, what is not.